You lay one more finger on her and I swear I'll drag your empire into the ground. The words left Maya's mouth before her brain could stop them, before fear could clamp down on her throat, before survival instinct could remind her that girls like her don't speak to men like him. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath, 300 faces turning toward the commotion like flowers following poison sunlight, and Marcus Ashford, tech billionaire, philanthropist, man whose face smiled from magazine covers and TED Talk stages, looked at her with the cold amusement of a god confronted by an ant. Do you think anyone will believe you? His voice was silk over razors, each word precisely placed. A black woman who works as a waitress? The emphasis landed like a slap on those last words, and Maya felt the weight of every stereotype, every assumption, every reason the world had given her to stay small and quiet and invisible pressing down on her shoulders like gravity had suddenly tripled. But Isabel Ashford was still on the floor, her emerald gown pooling around her like spilled paint, one hand pressed against her reddening cheek where her husband's palm had connected with the casual cruelty of someone who'd done it too many times to count, and Maya's phone was already recording in her apron pocket, the camera lens peeking out just enough to capture everything, and fear seemed like such a small price to pay for refusing to be one more person who looked away. It had started 60 seconds earlier, maybe less, time moving strange and elastic the way it does when the world cracks open and shows you its ugliest truths. Maya had been clearing champagne flutes from a high-top table near the orchestra, her feet aching in the cheap shoes she'd worn for 3 years of serving people who'd never remember her face, when she'd heard the sound of glass shattering against Italian marble. The crystal flute had slipped from Isabel's fingers, or been knocked, Maya would later realize, by the grip Marcus had on her wrist, too tight, too angry, the kind of grip that left fingerprint bruises on pale skin. The jazz quartet had faltered for only a measure before continuing, the violinist's eyes carefully fixed on her sheet music, the trumpet player suddenly fascinated by the ceiling's hand-painted frescoes, all of them trained in the art of not seeing what powerful people didn't want seen. The Next Gen Innovation Gala was the crown jewel of Marcus Ashford's charity empire, an annual event where tech titans and politicians mingled under chandeliers that cost more than Maya's childhood home, where a single plate of Chilean sea bass represented a week of her mother's grocery budget, where philanthropy was performed with the theatrical precision of people who understood that reputation could be purchased in tax-deductible increments. The ballroom at the Meridian Convention Center dripped with old money and new power, the walls lined with Ashford Industries banners celebrating innovation and social responsibility, the tables crowned with centerpieces of white roses that would be thrown away tomorrow, beauty as disposable as the people who'd grown and arranged them. Maya had learned to be invisible in rooms like this. 3 years of catering events for the wealthy had taught her that staff were furniture with pulses, that eye contact was dangerous, that speaking without being spoken to was grounds for immediate termination. She'd learned these lessons the hard way, watching other servers fired for minor infractions, replaced before their shifts ended, erased from spaces that had never really seen them as human anyway. She'd learned because she had to, because her mother's insulin cost $400 a month and her little sister's community college tuition was due in 6 weeks, and survival meant swallowing pride and anger and the constant awareness that she existed in these glittering spaces only as long as she remained useful and silent. But Isabel Ashford had looked up at her from the floor, blood dripping from her palm where she tried to gather the broken glass with her bare hands, apologizing in that automatic voice of someone who'd learned that everything was always her fault, and something in Maya's chest had cracked open like an egg, spilling all the rage she'd been carrying for 23 years of watching powerful people hurt vulnerable ones while everyone else studied the ceiling. Get up, Isabel. Marcus's voice carried, despite its low volume, the tone of a man accustomed to obedience. You're making a scene. She was the one making a scene. Not him. Not the man who'd struck his pregnant wife in a room full of witnesses. Her. The victim. The woman now trying to stand in heels and a gown that cost more than Maya's car, her hand bleeding, her cheek flowering red in the shape of fingers, her eyes holding that terrible combination of fear and resignation that comes from knowing that fighting back only makes it worse. Maya had moved without thinking, her feet carrying her across 20 feet of marble before her brain could catalog all the reasons this was suicide, and she'd crouched beside Isabel, her voice low and urgent. Ma'am, let me help you. You're hurt. She'd reached for Isabel's bleeding hand, and that's when Marcus had noticed her, really noticed her, his gaze sliding over her brown skin and polyester uniform and ponytail tied back with the cheap elastic that dug into her scalp during 12-hour shifts. The help is speaking. Marcus had smiled then, and it was the smile of a shark who'd spotted blood in the water. How progressive. That's when Maya had stood, her body moving before her mind could stop it, positioning herself between Marcus and Isabel in a gesture that was probably stupid and definitely dangerous, and that's when the words had tumbled out, hot and reckless and true. You lay one more finger on her and I swear I'll drag your empire into the ground. The ballroom's ambient noise, the clink of silverware, the murmur of conversation, the soft jazz, seemed to fade into white static as every eye found them. A state senator 2 tables away carefully set down his wine glass. A famous actress leaned toward her companion, whispering behind her hand. A tech journalist with 3 million followers pulled out his phone, then thought better of it and put it away. They all saw. Every single person in that room saw a billionaire threatening a waitress who dared to defend his wife, and not one of them moved to intervene, because intervention required courage and they'd all left theirs at home with their humanity. Do you think anyone will believe you? A black woman who works as a waitress. Marcus stepped closer, his cologne expensive enough to smell like power. Do you know how this ends? You lose your job. You never work in this city again. And tomorrow no one will remember your name. He was probably right. Maya knew the statistics, had lived the reality of being invisible to people who mattered, understood that her word against his was a joke the system would laugh at before filing away and forgetting. But her phone was recording, the lens angled just right from her apron pocket, catching every word and gesture and the backdrop of 300 cowards choosing comfort over conscience. Maybe you're right. Maya's voice shook but held. Maybe no one will believe me. But she will. She gestured to Isabel. And that might be enough. Security materialized like shadows gaining substance. 2 men in black suits with earpieces and the dead eyes of people paid to make problems disappear. One put a hand on Maya's elbow, not quite gripping but promising to, and she let herself be led away through the side doors into the service corridors where the beautiful people never went, where the lighting was fluorescent instead of golden, where the walls were cinder block instead of silk, where power could do what it wanted without an audience. They took her to a storage room that smelled of industrial cleaner and tablecloths waiting to be laundered. Marcus followed, his face composed now, the rage locked behind the mask he showed to boardrooms and interviews. That was unwise. His tone was almost paternal, like he was explaining reality to a child. I'm going to offer you a choice. You can sign a non-disclosure agreement, take $5,000 and walk away. Or you can refuse and I'll destroy you. I'll make sure every catering company, every restaurant, every service job in this city knows you're a thief who tried to extort me. Your mother, Grace Santos, lives on Druid Hill Avenue, doesn't she? She'll lose her apartment when you can't make rent. Your sister will drop out of school. Everyone you love will suffer because you couldn't mind your own business. The threat wasn't subtle because it didn't need to be. Marcus Ashford had $40 billion and the kind of connections that turned lives into collateral damage. Maya had $300 in her checking account and a phone full of evidence that might not matter because the justice system was designed by people like him to protect people like him from people like her. But she thought about Isabel's face. About the apology in her eyes. About 7 years of abuse hidden behind designer clothes and charitable donations. About every woman who'd stayed silent because speaking up meant losing everything. About her mother, who'd raised 2 daughters on minimum wage and food stamps and had still managed to teach them that character was what you did when no one was watching, even though someone was always watching, even if it was just your own reflection in the mirror at 3 in the morning when you couldn't sleep for shame. I need to use the restroom. Maya met his gaze without flinching. Then I'll sign. They let her go, a security guard waiting outside the bathroom door like she might try to escape through the plumbing. Maya locked herself in a stall, pulled out her phone with hands that shook so badly she nearly dropped it twice and opened the video file. 38 seconds of Marcus Ashford striking his wife, threatening a witness, revealing the cruelty he kept hidden behind philanthropic press releases. 38 seconds that could either ruin her life or save someone else's or maybe both, because justice rarely came without cost and the bill was always due. She uploaded the video to her cloud storage, then composed an email to 7 different addresses. Investigative journalists known for taking on powerful men, women's advocacy organizations that fought domestic violence, a state representative who'd built her career on protecting victims. The subject line was simple: Marcus Ashford assault video, urgent. Her finger hovered over send. This was the point of no return. This was career suicide and financial ruin and making herself a target for a man with unlimited resources and a history of crushing anyone who opposed him. She pressed send. Then she deleted the sent message, cleared her browser history, walked back to the storage room, and signed Marcus Ashford's non-disclosure agreement with steady hands and a clear conscience. Because sometimes you have to lose the battle to win the war, and the paper in her hand meant nothing compared to the truth already spreading through encrypted channels to people who couldn't be bought or threatened into silence. She left the Meridian Convention Center with empty pockets and a severance check she'd never cash, walking into the November cold in her thin polyester uniform while the gala continued behind soundproof doors. Marcus Ashford returning to his guests and his pregnant wife and his absolute certainty that money and fear could silence anything. The video broke 3 days later, posted first by a women's rights blog with a simple caption. "This is Marcus Ashford. This is power. This is why victims don't leave." Within 6 hours it had been shared 100,000 times. Within 12 hours major news outlets picked it up. Within 24 hours #AshfordAbuse was trending globally, the internet doing what it does best when properly provoked, turning a searchlight on truth that had been hidden too long in expensive shadows. Maya watched the explosion from her mother's living room, her phone off because she couldn't afford the plan anymore, refreshing news sites on her mother's ancient laptop. Marcus Ashford's face was everywhere now, his billion-dollar empire crumbling in real time as advertisers pulled their campaigns, board members called emergency meetings, employees leaked stories of harassment and abuse that had been suppressed by NDAs and fear, investigators opened inquiries that had been closed by influence and money. The man who'd seemed untouchable 48 hours ago was suddenly toxic, his name synonymous with the kind of predatory power that people were finally refusing to ignore. And Isabel Ashford spoke. Her interview on 60 Minutes was watched by 30 million people as she detailed 7 years of escalating abuse, the broken ribs explained away as falls, the bruises hidden under makeup, the isolation from friends and family, the pregnancy that had made her feel more trapped than ever. "I stayed because he convinced me no one would believe me over him," she said, her voice steady despite tears. "Because he had money and power and lawyers and I had nothing but fear. I stayed because everyone who saw what he did chose not to see. Until someone chose differently." The interviewer leaned forward. "You're referring to Maya Santos? She's the only person in that room who treated me like I mattered more than his influence. She lost everything for that choice. And she gave me everything I needed to finally leave." They met 6 weeks later in a safe house managed by a domestic violence organization, surrounded by security that Isabel now needed to protect her from Marcus's attempts to contact her through intermediaries. Isabel looked smaller somehow without the armor of wealth, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of designer gowns, her face bare and her eyes haunted but determined. "Thank you." The words came out broken. "I don't know if that's enough, but thank you for seeing me." Maya shook her head. "You don't owe me thanks for basic humanity. I'm just sorry more people didn't do the same. They were afraid." Isabel's smile was sad. "I understand that now. Marcus built his empire on fear, keeping employees afraid of losing their jobs, keeping me afraid of losing my child, keeping everyone afraid of his power. But fear only works until someone decides that silence is worse than consequences." In the months that followed, Marcus Ashford faced more justice than men like him usually do, which is to say some but not enough, which is to say criminal charges for assault and witness intimidation, civil suits from former employees who found courage in numbers, the loss of his company and reputation and the certainty that he was untouchable. He would never suffer as much as he'd made others suffer. That's the truth about powerful men, they break 1,000 lives and face only a fraction of equivalent punishment, but he faced something and sometimes something is the best justice the world offers. Maya never cashed the severance check. She framed it instead, a reminder that there were things money couldn't buy, like self-respect and the ability to look at her reflection without flinching. She found work with a non-profit that helped service workers document abuse and know their rights, the kind of job that paid in purpose instead of profit. Her mother's medication was covered by a GoFundMe started by strangers who'd been moved by her story, buying her the breathing room to choose meaning over survival for the first time in her life. She declined the interview requests and speaking offers and job proposals that tried to turn her courage into a career, because what she'd done shouldn't have required heroism, it should have been what everyone did, and accepting accolades for basic human decency felt like admitting that the bar was so low that simple moral action deserved applause. She wanted to live in a world where intervening to stop abuse was normal, not exceptional, where powerful men couldn't beat their wives in rooms full of witnesses and walk away untouched, where justice wasn't a luxury only the wealthy could afford. But mostly she wanted to sleep at night without seeing Isabel's face on the floor, without wondering what would have happened if she'd looked away like everyone else, without carrying the weight of all the times she had looked away before she learned that silence is never neutral, it's always a choice for power over justice. 300 people had been in that ballroom. 300 witnesses to cruelty and cowardice, 300 people who'd chosen comfort over conscience, who'd decided that someone else's pain wasn't their responsibility. And one person who couldn't live with that choice, who'd pressed record with shaking hands and changed everything, who'd learned that courage isn't the absence of fear but the decision that someone else's dignity matters more than your safety. Maya thought about that night often, about the sound of shattering glass and the silence that followed, about the moment when she'd stepped forward instead of back, about how easy it would have been to be one more person who saw nothing, said nothing, did nothing. She thought about the cost of speaking up. The job, the money, the security she'd sacrificed for 38 seconds of truth. And she thought about the cost of staying silent, which was carrying the weight of complicity forever, waking up every day knowing she'd chosen wrong when it mattered most. She'd chosen courage instead, not because she was brave but because she couldn't bear to be one more person who looked away when looking away meant abandoning someone who needed help. She'd chosen truth over comfort, consequence over complicity, justice over fear. She'd chosen to believe that her word could matter even when the world told her it wouldn't, that a black waitress could bring down a billionaire's empire simply by refusing to pretend she didn't see what everyone else was ignoring. And she'd been right. Not because the system was just or because powerful men always face consequences or because courage is always rewarded. She'd been right because sometimes one voice is enough to break the silence. One witness is enough to validate a victim's truth. One act of defiance is enough to show others that resistance is possible. She'd been right because power built on fear and money collapses when people stop being afraid, when they choose conscience over comfort, when they decide that silence has gone on long enough. In a world where power buys silence, courage is the only language that still speaks the truth.